Hello, everyone. I have been asked to respond to two critical questions. Firstly, which factors led to the rise of the Islamic State? And secondly, what could be done to deter and defeat these deadly terrorist organizations? So, to respond to these two critical questions, we have to look at the trajectory of this terrorist organization into two distinct temporal phases. The first phase lasted almost a decade, from 2006 to 2017, when the group was born and eventually declared defeated by the then US President Donald Trump. But after its so called defeat, the Islamic State did not just pack up and call it a quits. Rather, it went back to the drawing board and learned a great deal from Sun Tzu. And following his dictates on war and strategy, the IS avoided replicating the tactics, replicating the playbook that has brought the group its initial victory in 2014. It made a comeback with entirely different set of tactics and a different organizational framework. In 2020, the Islamic State resurfaced. That's what we call the resurgence phase. And in the resurgence phase, the Islamic State made a comeback by conducting hundreds of terrorist attacks in different parts of the world. From January 2024, the group has claimed more than 100 terrorist attacks in parts of Middle East, Africa, South, and Central Asia. And according to the Global Terrorism Index report of 2023, the IS and its affiliate terrorist organizations have been declared the deadliest terrorist organization, with more than 70% of the total attacks worldwide. These organizations, which were affiliated with the IS, they have been found active in more than 21 countries across the globe. This is the scale of threat that the group poses. But what is more important from the perspective of this lecture is that during the resurgence phase, IS demonstrates some distinct characteristics. Therefore, repeating the same playbook that helped the international community defeat this group in 2017 may not work. What is distinct and what is different in the resurgence phase? First is the geographic focus or geographic extent of the operation of the Islamic State. In the formative phase, in from 2010 onwards, the group had dedicated most of its energy in the Middle East. But in the resurgence phase, we can see more attacks beyond, far beyond Middle East, and including in the areas of Africa, Central, and South Asia. If you look at the propaganda material being produced by the Islamic State, if you look at the profiles of the militants affiliated with the IS, and if you look at the geographic reach of the attacks, it is clearly visible that the geographic focus of the Islamic State will move beyond the Middle East, and Central Asia and Africa are more likely to emerge as two hotbeds of the activities perpetrated by the Islamic State. So, as we navigate this evolving threat landscape, it becomes quite imperative to adjust our counter strategies accordingly. And I would like to reiterate that merely relying on the old playbook would not help us dealing with this problem. So I have organized my lecture into two parts. In first part, I'm going to explain to you six critical factors that have led to the rise of Islamic State. And in the second part, we are going to discuss which actions or which kind of strategy helped the international community defeat or declare the defeat of IS in 2017, and whether that particular set of tactics would be as useful today. So, if you look at the literature that is available on the Islamic State, we can deduce six critical factors that have helped the IS to rise in a spectacular manner in 2010 onwards in the Middle East. The first factor could be labeled as the political instability and power vacuum caused by the Anglo-US invasion of Iraq. The second factor was the Arab Spring that started in different parts of the Arab countries in 2010, 2011. The third factor that gave rise to IS was the weakness of the adversary that IS had faced during those days. Fourthly, fading away of Al Qaeda. Fifthly, Syrian civil war. And sixthly, the Egyptian coup in 2013 that removed the Muslim Brotherhood from the government. Let me explain one by one as to how these factors have helped the rise of the Islamic State. When we talk about the US invasion or the Anglo US invasion of Iraq in 2003, it led to the toppling of Saddam Hussein. And with Saddam Hussein, uh, um, a Sunni dominated status quo was shattered. The Shias, who were in the majority in Iraq, they assumed power, and after assuming power, they sidelined the Sunnis not only from the armed forces but other departments, other government departments as well. So that purge of Sunnis led to a sense of marginalization among the Sunni tribes, and scholars are of the view that was the single most decisive factor that pushed thousands of Sunnis in different parts of Iraq to join the ranks and files of the Islamic State. Secondly, the Arab Spring, which started somewhere in 2010 or 11 in Middle East and different parts of North Africa. This particular event inadvertently provided fertile ground for the rise of Islamic State because it destabilized the existing regimes there. And that instability resulted in a power vacuum that basically provided a breeding ground for the Islamic State. And secondly, most of the young Arabs have attached a lot of hopes with the anti-status quo forces during the Arab Spring. But as the revolution materialized, those hopes were dashed, and most of the new regimes, they were not able to live up to the expectations of the Arab youth, and that gave some sort of a sense to the young educated lot in the Middle East that perhaps political mobilization is not going to work to basically get them the kind of political system that they aspire for. Uh, Third reason that we can identify for the rise of the Islamic State was the weakening of Al Qaeda under the leadership of Ayman al Zawahiri. As Osama bin Laden was targeted by the US Navy SEALs in the garrison town of Abbottabad, Ayman al Zawahiri found it hard to impose cohesion. He actually was not able to bring different international fighters together. He lacked the charisma that was a hallmark of Osama bin Laden. And Osama bin Laden had once said that when people see a strong horse and a weak horse, by nature they will like the strong horse. So at that time, the Islamic State was emerging as a strong horse, and there was a natural tendency among the aspiring jihadists to join the strong horse. And the second reason that Ayman al Zawahiri failed to accommodate that that aspiration of the young jihadis was that there was a generational gap between the first leaders, the first generation of leader of Al Qaeda, and this new generation of zealots, which actually came into being after 2010. And the old guard of Al Qaeda was not able to correspond to their sense of dissatisfaction. Therefore, Islamic State was considered as a much better option compared to Al Qaeda by number of aspiring militants in the Iraq and Syria region. Fourthly, Syrian civil war. It provided the Islamic State an opportunity to fight against Alawite sect, which is considered as an offshoot of Shiaism, which is considered heretic by the Islamic State ideologically. The Syrian civil war was also seen by the Islamic State leadership as an avenue where the IS fighter can go and hone their skills for small unit fighting, for urban warfare. Therefore, it was imperative for the Islamic State to go and establish presence in Syria. So when the Syrian civil war unfolded, the IS leadership sent hundreds of fighters to Syria to join forces to fight against not only against the moderate Syrian resistance, but at times against the Assad regime as well. Uh, Syrian civil war was also manipulated by the Assad regime. He was more interested in protecting his rule rather than fighting Islamic State. That is why his forces released thousands of jihadists who were languishing in the Syrian prisons for last many years. And the Syrian intelligence at that time was of the view that these jihadists would be a lot of service for the Assad regime. How? Because when the jihadist threat would emerge in Syria, Assad wanted to be seen by the Western world fighting a global jihadist movement. Because actually, the Syrian resistance was quite secular in nature, and because of its secular nature, it was attracting a lot of support from the Western capitals. But this controlled chaos, which involved ultra jihadist forces such as Islamic State, gave some sort of legitimacy to the Assad regime and its oppression of the opposition forces. Um, in in distracting the international attention from the Syrian resistance and to basically act decisively against the opposition forces, which were largely of Sunni sect. Assad used his Alawite militias to basically go against the Sunni resistance, and that also widened the sectarian fault lines in the Syrian society. Thousands of Sunnis from Syria then they switched to the Islamic State and other ultra jihadist organizations. Basically, this is how the Syrian civil war had strengthened the Islamic State. The Egyptian coup of 2013 was yet another factor that led to the rise of Islamic State. Uh, this particular military coup, it toppled the government of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was a pan-Islamic political organization. Rather, I would say that it was the vanguard of the political Islam in across the globe. So when the Muslim Brotherhood was toppled, it led many to conclude that engaging in political process is not going to bring about the Islamic system that most of the Muslims in Arab world would think. And therefore, the most effective avenue for challenging the corrupt regimes propped up by the Western power was through organized violence. And that's why the Islamic State appeared as a more practical option compared to the political Islamist political parties who preferred political struggle over violence. Um, Sixth reason that has worked for the Islamic State was the weakness of the adversary that it faced in Iraq and Syria. Even before the emergence of the Islamic State, the Iraqi and Syrian governments' rule over the remote Sunni areas was very poor. And of course, the Iraqi and Syrian regime was seen as corrupt and inefficient. And in comparison, the Islamic State presented itself as a less corrupt and more efficient organization by providing social services in those areas which it captured. Similar problems existed in Iraq for example, when the Islamic State took Mosul in June 2014, perhaps 30,000 well-trained Iraqi forces fled the city in face of maybe 1,000 IS fighters. And they also left behind massive amounts of equipment, including some sophisticated tanks, as well as small arms and ammunition. That was the level of professionalism among the Iraqi forces, and that gave the Islamic State a lot of confidence. Uh, and these factors combined, they worked in favor of the Islamic State, and this group emerged as a de facto state in 2014, capturing some one third of the Syrian territory and 40% of the Iraqi territory. So, what were the ideological contours of the Islamic State? Some dominant characters of the Islamic State's ideology include that they believed in puritanical Islam, they considered Shias and Sufis heretics, they refused to accept the national boundaries, and skillfully utilized the end of time prophecies for the purpose of recruitment and legitimacy. In fact, profiling of hundreds of the Islamic State fighters suggests that majority of them had a strong belief that they are living close to the end of times, and the rebirth of Christ is just around the corner, and that is why they were preparing for the final battle, which is also called the Armageddon, where they were expecting for the rebirth of Christ and the arrival of Mehdi, who is a prophetic figure in the Islamic theology, who would come and lead the believers in their fight against the infidels. So the goal was quite ambitious. And what was the strategy that Islamic State actually followed? To understand the strategy of Islamic State, there are two prominent works that could help you to gauge to understand the strategy of Islamic State. The first is the book by Abu Bakr Naji. The title of the book is Management of Savagery, and the second book, or the second strategic manual, is called the strategic plan to improve the political situation of Islamic State in Iraq. It was written by an unnamed author. And the key features of the strategy include exhausting the will and authority of the state by carrying out a sustained campaign of violence. In fact, the 2009 strategy paper of Islamic State also included number of quotes from the Chinese military strategist and philosopher Sun Tzu. For instance, at one point, Sun Tzu had advocated that make your adversary always preoccupied with its internal problems, and that is what the IS quoted, borrowed directly from Sun Tzu, included in its manual, and it embarked upon a campaign of ruthless violence that was intended to disrupt the order, create chaos, and once the order collapses and anarchy ensues, the Islamic State would offer itself as an alternative by imposing security, by providing social support, and imposing Sharia to win popular support in those areas. The third phase of the strategy was to capture the territory. And once the Islamic State would capture the territory, it would work as the nucleus of a new caliphate that would be gradually expanded to different parts of the world. So that was the strategy of the Islamic State, which, of course, enabled it to control vast swaths of territory from 2014 to 2017. And it took a concentrated, sustained, and well organized international coalition to deprive the group of this territory, to destroy its capacity. And by 2017, first the Iraqi prime minister, he declared victory over Islamic State, and then President Trump followed the suit. And in 2018, he declared victory over the Islamic State. And that leads us to the second part of this lecture as to which factor led to the collapse of the Islamic State. So most of the scholars, they argue that more than any external pressure, it was the strategic blunders committed by the Islamic State itself that led to the destruction of the Islamic State. Starting with this term called implosion from within. We have to understand how this brutal campaign of violence unleashed by IS in the territory that they once captured, how it made them unpopular. The population under their control became hostile towards them, and gradually local resistance started to emerge. Number of Sunni tribes took up arms against the Islamic State. Then Kurdish Peshmerga, which was again a secular force, that too was quite hostile towards the Islamic State because of the repression and brutality that the Islamic State unleashed upon the Kurdish Peshmerga. So once these ground forces rose up against the Islamic State, the US-led international forces, they started to provide support to these local forces, which later proved quite decisive in the defeat of the Islamic State. Second reason that led to the implosion of the Islamic State was IS tendency to go solo. They were operating in a traditional society which has always operated and functioned around the alliance of tribes. IS wanted to go solo. It failed to forge alliances. Therefore, it could not succeed the way it had expected. Thirdly, IS opened too many fronts. And here I'm referring to the geographic overstretch of the organization from 2014 to 2016. From Iraq and Syria, they wanted to gradually move to different parts of the world. And in doing so, they created a lot many enemies who took up arms against them. Another strategic blunder that IS had committed was mismanaging the foreign fighters. There were 30,000 foreign fighters which came to join the Islamic State. Roughly 25,000 were from the Muslim world, and some 5,000 fighters were from the West. So those fighters were given special treatment, they were given special housing, special salaries, which created a sort of sense of alienation among the local population as to why these foreigners are being special treatment by the Islamic State. And then, of course, those fighters, and including those coming from the Muslim world, most of them could not speak Arabic, and that hindered their ability to integrate with the local population. So that failure to integrate and the sense of alienation because of the discriminatory treatment of the foreign fighters and the local population made the local population hostile towards foreign fighters and towards the Islamic State as well. So when the Islamic State started committing these blunders, like I said, the US led international coalition, which was composed of roughly 60 countries, it provided some crucial on ground and aerial support to these forces. Besides the American led international coalition, there was a number of regional countries as well, which fought decisively against the Islamic State, and most prominent of those regional forces was Iran, or the Shia mobilization forces prepared by Iran, because when IS was rising, ideologically, IS considered Shias heretics. Iran, being a Shia country, considered IS as a direct threat to its existence. And when IS started expanding its influence, Iran mobilized hundreds and thousands of Shias from the Middle East, from South Asia, to not only go and protect the Assad regime, but also to fight against the Islamic State. So Iran did not only provided physical support to anti-IS forces, but it also provided much needed religious legitimacy to these Shia fighters to fight decisively against the IS. So now, can these tactics be replicated to deal with the IS during the resurgence phase, or to deal with the new IS, or if you like to call it the IS 2.0? Daniel Bayman, in his review essay for international security, uh, he rightly argued somewhere in 2015 that uh, the anti Al Qaeda model may not apply to fighting the Islamic State, in large part because of Islamic State's many differences with Al Qaeda. He was of the view, for instance, that drone strikes have proved useful to eliminate Al Qaeda's leadership, but they may not be useful in defeating the IS, which acted more like a conventional force from 2014 to 17. Therefore, he advocated for a different strategy that also included some conventional response. That conventional response was quite effective. As I said, that in 2017, the IS was defeated largely. It was reduced to merely 5% of the territory that it had captured. But can we replicate the same strategy on the IS 2.0? That is $1 million question. I personally believe that the IS 2.0 act more like the Al Qaeda of 2001 and onwards. This IS is networked. This IS is least interested to create a state or to occupy a state the way it did in 2014. It acts more like a network, the way Al Qaeda did from 2001 onwards. So, therefore, there are some similarities that could be drawn between Al Qaeda and Islamic State of today. So, what it necessitates, how can we deal with that? So, I think some parts of the strategy that the international community had had adopted to deal with Al Qaeda may be useful to deal with the Islamic State 2.0. Uh, whether the geostrategic uh, environment is conducive enough for that amount of effort that we saw in 2014, I have my doubts. Given this evolving geostrategic environment across the globe, the US and its Western allies are least likely to devote on ground forces to fight Daesh, whether it's in Middle East, Africa, or Central Asia. We are least likely to see the global consensus, the sort of global consensus that we saw in 2014 when more than 60 countries came together to fight this menace. There's a difference of opinion, the way Daesh is approached, the way the Islamic State is approached, and that creates a lot of problems on ground to fight Daesh. For instance, there is a lot of suspicion in different countries about who is sponsoring Daesh. For instance, when there was this attack in Moscow, which killed hundreds of people there, the immediate response from Russia was that it is not IS, it is Ukraine and its Western patrons. And in the later stage, the Russian government did acknowledge the role of Islamic State, but Russia has always been of the view that the IS is the brainchild of the Western intelligence agencies. Russia is not alone in such misconception. The similar view is found in Iran, which believed that perhaps Western intelligence agencies have propped up ISK to weaken Iran. Afghan Taliban are of the view that ISKP, which is the South Asian branch of the IS, is being propped up by Pakistan, Iran, and Tajikistan to weaken the Afghan Taliban. So, this kind of divergence in treating IS is creating a lot of ongoing problems. So, first challenge is to create international consensus to acknowledge that IS is an empirical reality, that IS threatens the regional and global peace. It is only then we will see some concrete efforts in kinetic domain. Uh, the second part of strategy could be strengthening the local forces, the way the international community did in from 2014 onwards. Today, IS has roughly dozens of wilayas in different parts of the world. The most active wilaya or the province, the so-called province of IS, is located in Central and South Asia, which is called the Islamic State of Khorasan province. This is in this part of the world, Central and South Asia, where IS is most active. If the US is not willing or prepared to, to, to basically launch the ground forces in this part of the world, it is highly imperative that the West extends support to the ground forces here, whether it is to extend cooperation with the Pakistani government or to have some sort of cooperation with the Afghan Taliban. There have been a number of interactions between the American administration and Afghan Taliban, which are intended to squeeze the space for the Islamic State in Afghanistan and in Central Asia. So I think these are some of the initiatives which the United States may like to take to squeeze the space for ISKP. Thirdly, the third and I would say ideologically most important step to defeat and contain Daesh would be to recapture this narrative of the end of times. This narrative of rapture, Armageddon, is quite prevalent among all three biblical religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And it is attracting a lot many supporters with each passing day. According to some surveys in the Muslim world from 2012 onwards, roughly 40 to 50% population in the Muslim world do believe in apocalypse and believes that the end of times is near, and soon this army of believers would emerge from the Middle East that would fight against the unbelievers or the infidels. This is not for the first time that these jihadist forces are exploiting these these narrative of end of times. In the past, number of terrorist organizations in South and Central Asia have exploited these prophecies of end times to to recruit, to mobilize, and to legitimize their unlawful, unethical, and immoral jihad. So this is highly, I would say, it is needed that the Islamic government recapture this narrative of the apocalypse, the end of times, to deprive the Islamic State and groups like Islamic State of this ideological contour. Sectarianism was also one of the rallying cry or recruitment tool available to the Islamic State. So by targeting Shias, it tried to attract recruits from the Sunni world. But there are some positive signs. There is a ray of hope after Iran and Saudi Arabia normalized their relations last year, because both of these countries have been patronizing the militant Sunni and Shia militant groups, respectively, in different parts of the Muslim world. But with Iran and Saudi Arabia becoming politically close, or if not politically close, if they are able to basically bridge the gaps to normalize their relationship, I think that would go a long way to address this sectarianism in the Muslim world, and that would ultimately lead to squeeze this support for the group like the Islamic State. So, in the end, I would like to reiterate that in 2024, the Islamic State of 2024 is much different from the Islamic State of 2014. It no longer follows this classic strategy of the state acquisition or state building. It is more networked, it is more mysterious, and it calls for a different counter strategy, counterterrorism strategy, and some of the contours of that possible strategy I have just elaborated.